I'm thrilled to introduce our next presenter, our next bigger game changer, Mr. Charles Holt, and a couple words about him. Why don't you come on up? You're just too beautiful to be sitting over there. Nice to see you. Thank you for coming. So Charles, sort of the list goes on the resume, record producer, actor, singer, Hay House author, cha-ching, which is very exciting. And just a little connection moment. So we met probably, 12 years ago at a party in our backyard in Los Angeles through our dear friend James Mellon, who's sitting right there, who we're going to hear from on Sunday. So what I love is the connections and the allies, and here you are today, sharing your good message. And I'm just going to have a little moment. His book is called Intuitive Rebel. Intuitive Rebel. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's a joy and a pleasure and a thrill to have you at Silver Bay, Mr. Charles Holt. Have at it.
I was born by the river in a little old tent. And just like that river, I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming, and I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes it is. You know, these are songs that, growing up in the South, on a hot, steamy summer afternoon, you could hear everywhere in the little community that I grew up in. And my father was a fan of blues, of jazz, and he would monopolize the radio on Sundays while my mother prepared Sunday dinner. And I remember these songs. These songs, later on, I found out that these songs were actually in the trees, the leaves, the sap. The ground that I played on was saturated. Now, the community was formed in 1868 by a missionary by the name of Larry A. Thompson. And story tells that he stood upon this ground in thickets and brush, and he said, "On this land I will build my church, because it is the providence of God that has led me here." And he called the church Providence, Lake Providence. Now, I didn't grow up by a large body of water, but there was a creek on the northern border of the community where they used to dip the converts. And my grandparents, my great-grandparents, and my aunts and my uncles, my ancestors were all dipped in those chilly waters. And by the time I came along, my grandmother had all of these stories to tell me of how it was growing up in Lake Providence. She was born in 1901, and by the time I came along, she had all of these wonderful anecdotes. But you could find anybody in the community telling stories. These self-proclaimed griots. "Come here, son, I got something to tell you." And along with it came music. At the age of 3 and 4, I used to stay with Granny. My brother and my sister are both over a decade older than I am. Both of my parents worked. So I would spend time with my grandmother. And she would wake up in the morning with a hymn or some kind of musical selection, as she called it. And I'd say, "Granny, what are you singing?" She said, "Well, just come on by here. Sit right down here by my knee and I'll teach you." She had a raspy, out-of-tune alto voice. And she'd say, "Great is thy faithfulness, O God, my Father. There is no shadow of turning with thee. Thou changest not, thy compassions, they fail not. as thou hast been, and forever will be. Great is thy faithfulness. And I would say, Granny, Granny, teach me the word. She'd say, son, just open up your mouth. Open your mouth and repeat after me. And all of a sudden, my grandmother would tilt her head back, and I'd see tears rolling down her face. Of course, at the age of 3 and 4, I could not articulate or understand what was happening to my grandmother. So I'd tap on Granny's knee. Granny, Granny, come back. Are you okay? And she'd tilt her head forward and look at me, and it was a tacit agreement. She wouldn't say anything, but I knew that she was fine. But perhaps what I was feeling was something much more than music coming off of the tongue of this elderly woman. Something had filled the room, and I didn't know what it was. I couldn't tell you what it was at that point, but I knew something had happened, and it had transformed Granny, and it had gotten my attention. So now here I am, the youngest of 3 children, the youngest of many grandchildren. And so what this brought about as I began to live my life was a world of perks. You know, as the youngest, you just get perks. And one thing that I would seal the deal with was my smile. It was a way that I learned how to get what I wanted. So I grew up, and all I'd have to do was say, Mom, can I do this? Mom, can I do that? Please. Wish granted. But then there's another side to perks. I was a sweet little Southern Christian boy. My grandmother knew that I was going to be a preacher when I came out of my mother's. Well, oh, he's going to preach. My mother thought, oh, no, he's going to be a businessman. My uncles, oh, he can hit that ball. He's going to be a famous baseball player. He can really run, too. My father, he really didn't care. He was present, but not available, which was an interesting type of growing up. I really loved him, too. Still do. As time went on, I tried to acquiesce all of the dreams of these people. And so I went to church every Sunday, that Baptist church, Lake Providence Missionary Baptist Church, every Sunday, Sunday school, every Sunday. I want to show them that I'm this good little boy, my grandmother. And then later on, I became an All-American high school football player, went to college on a football scholarship, and began to dream, eat, football. I wanted to play professional football. I know you're looking at me, you're smiling, but you're saying, oh, you are awfully small, Charles, to be playing. And I was, but I was one of the fastest kids in the country. When I came out of college, I worked out for about 8 professional football teams as a cornerback and a return specialist, and it all went, whew. As soon as I dreamed it, it left me. I remember I was in my agent's office, and I had just worked out for the Cleveland Browns, and I had a great workout. I ran a 4.340, which is really fast for you who may not know speeds and how fast speeds are and how fast you're supposed to be. That was really fast, and I could dunk anything that I could grip. Doing, doing. And I came back to him, and I said, I had a really great workout. Have you heard from Cleveland? They're supposed to call me. He said, no, I haven't heard from Cleveland. I'm sure that they'll call, Charles. And then he took a breath and he looked at me and he said, have you ever thought maybe football is not what you're supposed to be doing? And I looked at him and I said, no, absolutely not. In my mind, I was thinking, how dare you say this? You're my agent. You're supposed to be getting me a team. But there was a place inside me that knew when he said it that he was on to something. I just didn't want to recognize it. Didn't get picked up, didn't get drafted. Started working for IBM. Now you know who was just elated over this. My mother. I said, Mom, I've just been hired by IBM. Oh, thank the Lord. My son's on his way to be a great business executive. What I didn't tell her was after 6 months of being on the job, they give you this development book. And one of the questions in the development book is, where do you see yourself at IBM in 6 months? Where do you see yourself at IBM in 2 years? Where do you see yourself at IBM in 5 years? And I politely picked up that pencil that was on my desk, and I looked to my right and to my left, and I wrote, "Not here." Didn't know what that was either. But I knew that that wasn't my suit. Well, I thought the grass could be greener on the other side. So I left IBM after 2 wonderful years, very successful years. I said, maybe I think I can do this business thing. And I went over and jumped over at another company, another large conglomerate. And a year later, they fired me. Well, I didn't call my mother first. I called one of my best friends, who is now one of my mentors, and I said, look, I'm at my desk. I'm reading this letter of termination. I've been fired. A bit of silence on the phone, and he said, oh, they fired you. I said, yes, they fired me. He said, no, they didn't fire you. I said, oh, yes, they did. You want me to read the letter? Dear Mr. Holt, as of today. He said, no, Charles, they released you. Now, I was a smarty pants. They released me to what? You know, when you think you're released, you're going from one thing to another, knowing that you are transitioning. I didn't know what I was going to do. I had no idea. He said, you know, you go to these jazz clubs and you sing these songs that you say were so wonderful when you were growing up. Open mic nights. You don't get paid for it. It's just a way for you to wash the week off. But when you sing, you light up the room. I said, me? Light up the room? Singing? Never fathomed in my life that I could do what I really loved doing and make people happy. I always thought I had to do something else and live up to someone's expectations. I said, maybe I can. I jumped in. I jumped into the world of performing arts. I had never taken formal lessons of any kind. The only music lesson that I had was my grandmother. No dance lessons, no acting lessons, but I jumped in. And all of a sudden, I get a call. I was living in Atlanta at the time, and Kenny Leon, who was the artistic director of the Alliance Theater, he called me, and he said, Charles, my name is Kenny Leon. You don't know me, I don't know you, but I'm directing a show called The Amen Corner, which is based on the novel of James Baldwin, and we just had someone drop out of the show. The show goes up in 3 weeks. There are 3 people in my cast who have heard you sing and who say that you are the man to fill the part. Now, if you know what happens in the world of performance, this never happens. So he asked me, he said, would you like to take the role? And I said, yes, I would. He said, on one condition, though. I said, yes, what is that? He said, you better be good. I took the role in the Amen Corner, and that was a treat. Being on stage every night, performing with some of the world's most wonderful singers and actors and dancers. And I remember I was about to go upstairs. They had called places to the top of Act 2. It's your call to places. And I had gotten up out of my seat, getting ready to go up to the stage for the top of Act 2, and I hear a voice. It said, it's time, Charles. I looked around the room. No one else was in the dressing room, by the way. I said, maybe I'm working too hard. I'm hearing voices. I said, let me go on upstairs. I took 2 steps. It's time, Charles. Now, a year later, I had met a gentleman by the name of Adrian Bailey. He had come down to Du Bois from Syracuse. We had mutual friends in the company. And one day he said, I heard you can sing, man. I heard you could sing. Why don't you sing a little bit for me? And I said, okay. I sang a little bit. He said, you'd be great in the show that I'm getting ready to go back to New York and premiere. And I said, what's the name of the show? He said, Smokey Joe's Cafe. You should go get the soundtrack. Listen to the soundtrack. And I went and got that soundtrack, and I tell you, I would walk down the street in Atlanta singing those songs, and I would strike a pose as if I was up on that Broadway stage. Come to myself, and I thought, wow, that really felt good. That really felt right. Come back to the moment where this voice is speaking to me. And I said, could it be that the voice is telling me I should move to New York? I think it may be. I went and purchased my ticket. Now, I'd lived in the South all my life. Hardly ever been out of the South. And before I had to leave on my next journey, you know the person who you have to clear everything with, especially if you're a Southern boy, the baby of a Southern mother. So I called my mom and I said, Mom, guess what? My mother has an interesting way of speaking with us. And somehow she knows when we're about to say something that is out of ordinary with the normal conversation. So I said, hey, Mom. Said, guess what? What? I'm moving to New York. She said, let me get something right, son. She said, you graduated from a top-tier school, you got a job with IBM, fast track up the corporate ladder, all of those benefits, and you leave. You go to another company, same scenario, same thing. And a year later, they fire you. And now you're telling me that you're going to move to New York City? That's the most dangerous place in the world. Folks are crazy in New York. I mean, she went down the list. She said, I want you to do something before you move to New York and become an actor, the most unstable job in the world. I want you to go to the white pages and thumb all the way through till you get to the word P, the business section. Thumb all the way down to psychiatrist. And when you get to the first listing, call the number, son. It doesn't matter if it's a man or a woman. Call the number and set your appointment, honey. Go in and tell them all of your troubles because you have lost your mind. And as usual, I said, Mom, I will call the psychiatrist. I will go in and see the psychiatrist. There's only one thing. I've already purchased my ticket. I'm going to New York. Now, I had no idea what was calling me. I knew something was, though. And I knew that I had to leave the nest. And I knew I had to go. So I go to New York. It's 1996. Rent. How many of you saw Rent or have heard of Rent? Broadway musical. It's the #1 hit on Broadway at the time. And I want to get me some of that Broadway. I walk outside. And the first thing I see are these skyscrapers, and the sky is blue, and people are walking, hustling down the street, and taxis are whizzing down like they're on a speedway, and their dogs barking, and I looked up and I said, I'm home. Never, ever been out of the South before. And there was something that resonated with the inner core of myself that said, you're right where you're supposed to be. A month later, I was hired in Jesus Christ Superstar with Ted Neely and Carl Anderson. And I remember the feeling, and it's still, like we heard earlier this morning, it's that letting go and understanding that something else is pulling you, but letting go. And I remember, I said, I have to call my mother and tell her. And so I called my mother, and of course, I said, hey, Mom, with excitement in my voice. I said, I just got the national tour of Jesus Christ Superstar. Now, my mother, we didn't grow up on theater. We just had our own little theater in our, with the self-proclaimed griots and all of the music. And I said, I've just been hired as Simon in Jesus Christ Superstar. My mother's response was, Jesus who? I said, Jesus Christ Superstar, Mom. I said, it's a musical. I said, it's a great musical. Been all over the country, all over the world. And of course, she was a mother. Are you going to be okay? Your safety, those types of things. But I went on tour for 6 months, and at the end of the tour, there was another casting director who invited me to the audition for Smokey Joe's Cafe. This was February 1997. If you've ever been to New York in February, you probably will never, ever go again. It is freezing. So we're in the casting of Virginia. It was a Virginia theater then. It's now the August Wilson Theater. They had us crammed down in what is the wardrobe section. Some of us were warming up, la, 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 on the front of Broadway and West 51st Street. And I remember they called us and they stacked us 24 to the stage. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and on so. And they said, when you get up, we want you to sing your best 16 bars, step back, and then let the next person come up. And so I went up and I sang my best 16 bars and stepped back. And after 3 days, they had whittled 600 down to 24. And I was walking out of the door, still just green. I was just so grateful to be there. So grateful to be in the number. I walked out, and this gentleman said, they really like you. And as a good little Southern boy, I said, thank you. Went on about my business. 45 minutes later, I get a call from Richard Frankel Productions, Charles Holt. This is Laura Green. We'd like to offer you the role in Smokey Joe's Cafe, the only role that was being cast at that time. I never knew that they were only casting one person. I went on the road for a year, the first national tour of Smokey Joe's Cafe, and the last month we were in Japan. We started in Okinawa for a week, Fukuoka for a week, and then Tokyo for 2 weeks. My mind is racing. My life is changing. These self-proclaimed griots that I grew up with, they're still following me. That music is right at my elbow. I cannot get away from it. I returned to the States, and that's when my mind began to really settle in on what my grandmother used to teach me. She used to teach me that everybody had a place at the table. And when I went and I befriended this Buddhist over in Japan, it was the first time that I had ever been out of my head thinking that I could not, that I was only supposed to, I should say, mingle with those of the same religion, the same like mind, even the same color sometimes. My life was changing. So I get back and I'm having a moment. I was living in Harlem at the time, and I went to my bedroom and I sat on the edge of the bed and I said, okay, I need to talk to you. All of these things that I believe, they're being challenged now. That's my buddy over in Japan, and I love them. They're Buddhist, so help me through this. So here's the transition, the integration period. It didn't take long. I was on the A train headed home one day, and I said, what is this all about? I want to know what this is all about. And I looked up, and in the advertisement, there was no real word, but there were letters that spelled L-O-V-E. And it seemed like I was in a disco, because every time that globe in my mind would come around, it would flash on love. Flash on love. And I said, okay, I'm beginning to see it. Now, all of these demonstrations of love had just come before me growing up in this small community in Nashville called Lake Providence. And now it was all coming together. 1999, I get a call from Jay Bender and Associates to come in and audition for Lion King. Lion King's the biggest thing in the world at this time. Biggest show on Broadway. And I go in, and unlike any other audition, they only bring 4 of us in. We're in to replace a South African, and he's only supposed to be gone for 4 months, and they come in and they scale us. We don't want a song, we just want a scale, because the first note out of his mouth is a high C. And then they danced us, and my friend Aubrey Lynch was there to dance us. Aubrey, raise your hand. And so they said, okay, at 10:30, we're going to have someone call, and one of you is going to be cast in the Lion King. Well, 7:30, 8:30, 9:30, I had taped my cell phone to my ear. Please call me, please call me. 10:30, 10:31. I said, oh, I guess that they've chosen someone else. And all of a sudden, I look on my phone, and the voicemail alert is flashing. I make a telephone call. Mark Brandon. Charles, give me a call. This is Mark Brandon. I've been trying to get in touch with you all day. I call Mark, and he says, we finally got your show. Welcome to the Lion King. Didn't know what was going to happen when I moved there, but I'm sure glad I landed in Lion King. I remember my first night of performance, December 17th, 1999. If you all saw the show, if you saw the stage production, if you remember the big gray elephant coming down the aisle, I was in the back left leg. And we proceed down the aisle, and as we get closer to the stage, I peek out of my costume, and I see rows and rows of eyes just open in amazement, and I see mouths just, wow, and I see children and adults, and I see tears. And I make it to the stage. It's the circle of life, and I look out into the audience, and something says, see, do you remember? Do you remember when you struck the pose? And I said, I do. I do. I knew that there was more to come. After 3.5 years of 8 shows a week, grueling rehearsal schedule, thanks to Aubrey. Seems like every Thursday or Friday we were rehearsing, which made it seem like a 10-show week. After 3.5 weeks, I started waking up in the middle of the night. You know how you can be in something for such a long time, and then it just becomes every part of your eating Lion King, sleeping Lion King. And I said, I've got to get out of this show. I've got to get out of this show. So I called one of my mentors, and I said, look, I have an idea. I need to get out of the Lion King. I'm going to leave the show. And he said, well, before you do, you need to write down about 5 reasons why you want to leave. And I came up with a very good list of why I thought I should leave. There was only one word that I could come up with, but I thought my inflections on this boredom that I was feeling was pretty good. So I said, he said, well, why do you want to leave? I said, I'm bored. I'm bored. You know, as an actor, you just inflect, I'm bored. And he said, is that all you have to tell me? I said, yes, because I'm really bored. He said, that's not a reason to leave. So I stayed. And I remember I went to the theater one afternoon, a couple of hours before the top of the show that evening. And I thought I was going to take a nap in my dressing room. I became restless, went downstairs, and I laid on the stage. And I looked up the catwalk, and I asked the question, why am I still here? Then the other question came. Why am I here? I believe inside of every question is the answer, and perhaps the answer is saying, get him to ask you. Get her to ask you. And when we do, our level of expectancy gets us to the place where we can listen long enough to hear the answer. My mind went into this rewind mode, and I remembered December 17th, 1999, and I remembered the call from Rafiki the Baboon, and I remembered getting up on that stage and seeing all of those eyes and all of those faces, and something says, that's it. That's why you're here. And I said, what? And the voice said, it's not about you. It's not about you. It's about what comes through you. And then it shows up as you, and you become contagious as everyone else can. It changed my life. I left New York and I left Lion King and moved to Los Angeles. That little old Baptist and Pentecostal upbringing I had said goodbye to. I said, I can't do church anymore. I need a whole new reconditioning of my mind, and I don't know how it's coming, but I know that it can. And I moved to Los Angeles. The first thing my roommate asked me was, want to go to church? And I said, no, I don't do church anymore. He said, no, it's not like church. I said, okay, I'll go. I arrived. Got there late. Place was packed. I was headed to the seat on the back wall, and I heard this short man. I looked up at him, and he said, if you are conscious and aware or not, that right where you sit or stand is exactly where you're supposed to be. Help them feel it, Ricky. It was Dr. Michael Beckwith of Agape International Spiritual Center. And those words arrested me because I didn't want to hear them. I didn't want to be in that church. And it still felt like church to me, but something inside of those words activated that part of me that was ready to move on a cellular level. I had moved physically, but I was ready to move on a cellular level. And so I said, okay, now, if it's not all about me, then what is it about? Give me the details. Let me write it down. I'm ready to listen now. And I began to write down all of the things that had coursed through my mind and my life. See, growing up in Lake Providence, they had been sustained because they were community. My grandmother had told me a long time ago the only way that they had survived was getting from the resources, or getting the resources from the community and one another, making it good for yourself, and then giving it all back. And I learned that. And then she said, and whatever you do, son, as my mother had taught me, even if you don't like it, be the best that you can. Be the best that you can. Do the very best that you can. And at the end of the day, know that all is about service. We had all of those elders in our community who, some of them couldn't go to the store and get things. So we were asked to do it. And so all of this was coming to my mind now and trying to figure out, what is it about? That's what it's about, Charles. You grew up with it. That's what was trying to get you. It's following you. It was in the music. It was in those stories. And it's in you. I started creating projects and music and my first CD and my second CD, and I sat down with every single song and I asked the song, how do you want to sing me? I'm ready to listen now. I'm ready to find my voice. 2007 comes. You know how when you move a place and all of a sudden you feel like, wow, should I have made this move? Was it indeed my intention? Was it my heart that said so? I started taking this class, a financial expansion class. Went to my bank account and there was negative $268 in my account. I didn't know what I was going to do for money. And I would always have these breakthroughs, breakdowns and breakthroughs. By this time, I was going to spiritual centers and singing on Sunday, getting an honorarium, and then taking what I had to the bank. But before I could get to the bank, the voice in my head would say, as soon as she gives you the slip back, it's going to be negative again. And I would say sometimes, I don't want that. I'm not going to go and stand in the line. It's too painful. And I would hear a voice say, yes, stand in the line. It's going to be okay. We're going to walk through this together. And eventually, I knew that this was the voice of my inner sanctum. Something was telling me that even though the situations with the surface mind and the surface eyes, they didn't seem as if things were coming together, but they were. Just trust. They said it in those little stories that they told. Remember when you moved to New York? You didn't know. Remember, trust again. This is part of what we've come here today to do as well, is figure out what's the next bigger game for us. So I did trust. I've been touring churches and spiritual centers now, and Reverend James Mellon, he is gracious enough to have me come and be a part of what is unfolding at North Hollywood, NoHo, Center for Spiritual Living in North Hollywood. And I'm so grateful for that, because at one time I didn't think those monies or those honorariums would sustain me, but somewhere in there I knew that I wanted to find my voice. I had the hunger, because I knew that that word that had been spoken to me about, it's not about you. And when I asked, I got the answer. It is about other people. It is about us. It's about me too, but yes, I want to share the goodness that I have been given. And so I continue to do that. I've been doing that since June 3rd, 2007. I also now speak on college and university campuses all over the country, empowering students to find their own voice. And what I learned was, wow, it's not really overnight. I can't flash a smile. Universe! Doesn't happen like that. The universe is saying yes, but it's an inside job. So I married this self-discovery. And I said, I know that there are treasures inside of me that have not been opened yet. And I'm going to go on a treasure hunt, because I believe that if I am to play the biggest game and continue to play my bigger game, it is going to be found inside. And I'll have all of these wonderful demonstrations out here to point me yet again in directions. But I tell you, it was something trying to find the courage and the grace and ease and not have to struggle so much. And I'm a tree hugger. I love trees. Started when I was a little boy. We used to play hide and go seek, and we had a big tree in our yard. And that was the base. And if I got to that base, I would hug that tree. I'm safe. And I remember I was traveling to Northern California, and I had never been to a redwood forest before. And one of my friends, she took me to the redwood forest, and now in the belly of this, I can't even describe what it was. There was silence when I got there. And there were these giant living things. They had had a fire some years before, and some of them had been burned down to maybe 15, 20 feet. And I remember as I was leaving, I had hugged every tree and touched every tree. I was leaving. This one tree, she had been hollowed out by the fire. There were 6 smaller trees. Her base was about the size of this platform. She was monstrous, and I knew it was a female, because being around a lot of women, I understood what feminine energy felt like. Nurturing, beautiful, feminine energy. And so before I left the forest, I heard a voice say, "Come over here and touch me." Now, I'd heard a lot of voices, so I wasn't afraid, and I knew that this tree was calling me. So I went over and touched the tree. She said, "Put both hands on me." And I put both hands on the tree. She said, "All the wisdom that has ever been and that will ever be is inside both you and me." She said, come inside. I walked in. Just complete silence. She said, walk around. And I turned around and came back. And after that, I went out of the forest. And I knew that I was one with nature. I knew. But after that experience, I wanted to run and just tell everybody, go touch a tree, hug a tree. They love you. And all of those insects that had made their habitants inside of that, they love you too. And when I came out, I said, could it be that nature is the blueprint for how we all live? And could it be that this is just another example of that voice telling me it's not about you, Charles? Could it be that? And so I began to write it in my next book, how we are all one. And there are things that come into our life at every stage that continue to get our attention so that we can wake up. I'll leave you with this one last story. I had mentioned before that my father was present but not available. We had a tumultuous relationship growing up. I didn't think my father liked me. I thought my father hated me at one point. I played sports. I was a straight A student. I would show my father my report card. He would look at my report card and say, give it back to me. I had several different scouts and colleges recruiting me when I was in high school, and I wanted my father to come and see me play football so badly. And he finally did my 11th grade. My brother dragged him. And I said, Daddy, how'd you like the game? He said, it was all right. I said, oh, okay. Glad you came. And so when I was in Lion King, when I was in Jesus Christ Superstar, I had another moment. Something told me to call my father, and I did, and I forgave him. And I remember I was expecting to hear him say, I love you. But instead, when I told him what I was forgiving him for, all the things that he said, all of the things that he did, he denied all of it. Well, that infuriated me, and I found the other list. And I went down that list. And then I heard that voice. I said, tell him why you really called. And I took a deep breath. Gulp. And I said, Daddy, I love you. I always have. And I always will. Silence. All right, gotta go. He hung up the phone. At the end of that conversation, I said, I don't care what he says to me anymore. I'm going to always tell him that I love him because it's my truth and because I do. So I think 3 or 4 years later, I'm home on a holiday just for a couple of days, and I'm getting ready to leave to go to the airport, go back to New York. And, of course, I tell my mother, who's my hero, I love you, Mom. And I looked at Dad. I said, love you, Daddy, without any expectation. And I'm turning, and I hear, I love you, too. I get back to New York, and I'm sitting on the bed, and all I can say is, he said he loves me. He said he loved me. I'm going to try it again. So I called my mother. I said, I'm just going to call him and let him know I made it home okay. I called my mother. My mother said, okay, we're glad you made it home, son. I mean, she couldn't get the last words out. Is Daddy there? Put him on the phone. And I said, okay, Dad, I just want to let you know I made it home. Okay, I love you. Silence. Now, years fast forward, I'm now living in Los Angeles, and my father has been diagnosed with end-stage renal disease at the age of 80. I go home, because I know that my parents are needing me. I travel all over, and so I can set my schedule where I'm in one concentrated area for months at a time. And when I'm not traveling, I can take care of them. So I go home, and the first thing I hear is, "Oh, he's home. He's back. Oh, that's my baby. I love him so much." Part of me was angry. Why didn't you say that when I was growing up? Why didn't you say that when I needed it? And then the other voice said, what if he did? What if he couldn't say it like you wanted him to? Well, I went into rage. That's ridiculous. All you have to do is say, I love you. But what would you say to someone who'd never been taught how to say that? What would you say to someone who never had the courage to say that? And I say, well, where did he find the courage now? Could it be that you gave him courage when you told him that you loved him? Could it be? And I said, yeah, it could be, but I didn't want that. I wanted to make him wrong, still. But then I looked at my father. I looked at an 80-year-old man who had weathered many storms, and now who was up to his greatest challenge. And I said, Dad, what is it that you need for me to do? I'm just so glad you're here. I'm so glad you're here. And I want to come closer to you and tell you all about my stories. My father had never told me stories. He was ready now. We were both ready to listen. January of this year, my sister calls me and she says, the doctor has come in and said that Dad has probably a couple of days left here. You should make arrangements. And I left the next day, and I got there. And before I got there, it's interesting. The night before I left to go back, my dad came to me. We had a conversation during my meditation. And he said, when you get to Nashville and you see that body on the bed in the hospital, he said, just know that that body is releasing. I'm leaving. But I don't want you to go to Nashville and make it a scene. I want you to go so you can be there for your mother, for your siblings, and for everybody that comes in that house. I want you to serve them. And so my father made his transition 18 days before his 88th birthday. And now, when I talk to him, he says, you know what? Let's write that book about fathers and sons that you were talking about 2 years ago. And so the name of the book that is coming up, and it's probably going to be a smaller book, it's called Between Me and Dad, Fathers and Sons Healing Generations. And one of the things that, Lisa, you were talking about this morning is part of the hunger that has burned inside of me, just like when that big redwood, when she had burned, I was asking, why are all these smaller redwoods around? And one of them spoke to me and said, well, when she was hot enough, we were able to germinate and sprout. Because you can only grow at a certain temperature in these places. And it was hot enough. And I'm hot enough now. And I look around and I see what has existed for many years. The miscommunication, the misconstrued information, the ignorance, and the historical denying between fathers and sons on every level. And I said, you know what? Me and Daddy are going to change this thing. I'm definitely going to tell my story about me and my father because I'm grateful for one. I'm grateful that I was here, and I'm grateful that I got to see his arc of him, because surely he came into this place with love and he left it with love. Shuffling off not just the mortal coil, but all of those things that gave him indication that he should follow a social coding that said men don't cry. They don't tell their sons and daughters that they love him. Somewhere along the line he said, surely that can't be me. I love you, baby. And so as we continue to grow, as I continue to ask, what's next? I don't know all of the details. All I can say is yes. Yes, I'll go. I'll do it. I'll say it. And they're going to help me. They're going to help me. I'm going to take them with me, and they're going to take me with them. I thank you so much for listening. Stories have just been delicious in my life. So has music. And every time I get a chance to share the goodness that has come through one of those stories, even when I didn't understand it at the time, now I say to myself, wow, what a setup. What a great setup this all has been. The good, the bad, the indifferent, and sometimes the awful. But it does get us to the point of where we ask, what's next? What is my bigger game? Thank you so much. It has been a delight.
Thank you.